For many years, the women who worked as guards in Nazi concentration camps were known as the female face of death. In places where torture and mass murder happened every day, these women didn't just follow orders, they took things even further. They carried whips, showed no emotion, and forced thousands of prisoners to live in fear and pain. At camps like Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Bergen-Belsen, their names were linked with terror. These women weren't just standing by. They were active participants in the Holocaust. They decided who would live and who would be sent to their deaths. Shockingly, many of them were even more cruel than their orders required. Some created their own methods of torture that were more violent than anyone had imagined. So why did these women act this way? What crimes did they commit behind those gates? And what made them go beyond just doing their job? The role of women in Nazi death camps is a dark and often overlooked part of history. Hitler's Nazi regime aimed to destroy millions of people they considered unwanted, and this system controlled every part of life, including the camps. At first, women weren't given authority in these camps, but after 1941, things changed. As the war grew and more men were sent to fight, the SS, the group that ran the camps, started recruiting women. These new female units took on major roles in running the camps and carrying out acts of terror. The Nazis had a strange view of women. On one hand, they said German women should stay home and raise children. But on the other hand, they wanted these same women to help build a totalitarian state. Job ads were posted in newspapers offering good salaries and chances to move up. For many women, especially those from poor backgrounds or with little education, this seemed like a great opportunity during hard economic times. Many who signed up were housewives, hairdressers, nurses, teachers, or factory workers. Some joined because they believed in Nazi ideas. Others were just looking for work. But once inside, they became part of a system built on cruelty and death. Ravensbrück, a camp just 90 kilometers from Berlin, was the main training center for female guards. There, women went through 4 weeks of harsh training. They were taught Nazi beliefs and how to control prisoners using both physical and emotional violence. Guards were told not to see prisoners as people, but as numbers that could be discarded. They learned how to use whips and sticks, how to organize forced labor, and how to make selections, deciding who would work and who would die. Psychological terror was part of their daily tools. Unlike the male guards who focused on military skills, these women were trained specifically to deal with female prisoners in the women's sections of the camps. After training, they were sent to various camps, including Auschwitz, Stutthof, and Bergen-Belsen. In women's areas, these guards had total power. Some were involved in selecting victims for the gas chambers. Others forced prisoners to work until they collapsed. Beatings, torture, and starvation were part of daily life. The goal wasn't just control, it was death. Some names became infamous. Maria Mandel and Elizabeth Volkenrath were known for their extreme cruelty and played leading roles in carrying out genocide. Their efficiency made them respected by the SS, but feared by all prisoners. Even though these women were part of a structured Nazi system, many of their actions showed a level of cruelty that went beyond simply following orders. They became key players in the Nazi killing machine, directly causing the suffering and death of millions. What made their behavior even more shocking was that, as shown in later testimonies and trials, many of them didn't just obey, they showed real eagerness. They even came up with new ways to torture and punish people without being told to do so. This shows that their cruelty was often a personal choice, not just something forced upon them. Studying the roles of these women helps us understand how normal people can be turned into monsters when certain conditions come together. These include intense ideological training, pressure from the system, constant dehumanization of victims, and unchecked power. Nazi ideology shaped these women until they became willing participants in a system designed for mass murder. Their roles weren't passive. They actively helped and even led the violence and killings. Understanding what they did helps explain how ordinary people can commit terrible crimes under certain influences. One of the most horrifying examples is Bergen-Belsen, a Nazi concentration camp where female guards played a major role. This camp, located in Lower Saxony, Germany, may not be as well known as Auschwitz or Treblinka, but it was just as deadly. Even though there were no permanent gas chambers, over 70,000 people died there because of starvation, disease, and constant abuse. Women guards were deeply involved in running the camp and in making it a living hell. Bergen-Belsen was first opened in 1940 for French and Belgian prisoners of war. Later, it was used for Soviet prisoners. By 1942, about 41,000 Soviet prisoners had died there because of starvation, disease, and forced labor. In 1943, the SS took full control and made it a true concentration camp. In August 1944, part of it was turned into a women's camp. Thousands of women were brought in from other camps like Auschwitz and Ravensbrück. Conditions were extremely overcrowded, food was almost non-existent, and diseases like typhus spread rapidly. Along with the prisoners came many SS women guards, some already known for their cruelty. One of them was Elisabeth Volkenrath, who had previously helped choose victims for the gas chambers at Auschwitz. She became the chief supervisor of the women's camp. Witnesses later said she once threw an old woman down the stairs, killing her instantly. She would also take medicine meant for the sick and force weak prisoners to perform exercises until they passed out or died. Then there was Johanna Bormann, known as the woman with the dogs. She used her trained German shepherd to attack prisoners. Survivors said she let the dog maul women just for small things, like picking up food from the ground, wounds that often led to death because of the lack of medical care. Another notorious guard was Irma Grise, who had worked at other camps before. She was over 1.90 meters tall and known for her harshness. She beat prisoners who couldn't keep up with hard labor. Though she admitted slapping people, many witnesses said she beat them so badly that some died. Life under these guards was full of fear. Prisoners had to stand for hours in harsh weather during roll calls. Minor things like a button not being fastened properly could result in harsh punishments, kneeling on sharp gravel or standing barefoot in snow. In early 1945, things became even worse. Thousands of new prisoners arrived as other camps were shut down and people were moved. Food became even scarcer and diseases spread rapidly. The female guards made it worse by stealing food, denying medicine, and punishing people even more brutally. March 1945 was the deadliest month for Bergen-Belsen. 18,000 people died. When British troops arrived on April 15, 1945, they found a scene from hell. Bodies were everywhere. The air was full of disease, and many survivors were so weak they couldn't move. A British officer said it looked like an entire field of dead and dying people, impossible to tell apart. Among the chaos, the British found many SS guards still at the camp, including some of the women. These women were arrested, and as a first step toward justice, were made to help clean the camp and bury the dead. Photos of these women carrying bodies became powerful symbols of accountability and were shown around the world. What made Bergen-Belsen special was that many of its staff were still there when the camp was liberated. This allowed for a major war crimes trial, the Bergen-Belsen trials, where for the first time, female guards were officially charged and judged for their crimes. Usually guards would flee before liberation, but here many were caught. These trials were important in showing the role women played in the Holocaust. Bergen-Belsen proves that female guards weren't just standing by. They were active, cruel. Irma Gräser and Maria Mandel were two of the most notorious women in Nazi concentration camps. One became known for her sadistic violence and cruelty, while the other was an efficient administrator who used her ambition to enforce extermination policies. Their lives show how the Nazi regime turned ordinary women into key parts of a brutal system. Irma Gräser was born on October 7, 1923, into a rural family in Mecklenburg. Her early life was difficult. She left school at 14, tried and failed to become a nurse, and lost her mother at a young age. Her father supported Nazi ideas, and Irma found a sense of belonging in the League of German Girls, BDM, a Nazi youth group. By 18, she joined the SS Ghoul as a female auxiliary guard and was sent to Ravensbrück for training. Irma quickly showed she had a talent for violence. In 1943, she was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she first oversaw female labor groups. Her cruel discipline earned her quick promotions, and soon she became the head of Camp C, where mostly Hungarian women were kept. She stood out because of the pleasure she took in causing pain. She invented her own torture methods and often targeted young women she saw as prettier or a threat to her looks. Survivors described her appearance clearly: perfectly pressed uniform, shiny boots, neat blonde hair, and always carrying a braided whip and a pistol. Her beauty and youth, combined with her cruelty, made her known as the hyena of Auschwitz and the blonde angel of death. Irma also took part in choosing who would die in the gas chambers. She showed no emotion when separating mothers from their children. Witnesses said she even seemed to enjoy telling prisoners how they would die, describing the process with cruel delight. Maria Mandel was different in style, but just as dangerous. Born on January 10, 1912, in Munich, Austria, she was older than Irma. She joined the concentration camp system after the Nazi takeover of Austria in 1938. Starting as a guard at Lichtenberg, she moved to Ravensbrück, where she was known for her skill in organizing and managing. In 1942, Maria became the highest-ranking female officer at Auschwitz-Birkenau. She controlled 30,000 female prisoners and all female guards. She reported only to Rudolf Huss, the camp commandant. While Irma focused on personal cruelty, Maria built systems to cause large-scale suffering. She made detailed plans for how prisoners were processed, deciding who would work and who would go to the gas chambers based on their usefulness. Maria created punishment systems where if one prisoner made a mistake, the whole group suffered. She also introduced Block 25, a place where selected prisoners waited for death without food or water, often surrounded by corpses. What made Maria especially chilling was how she balanced her violent work with a love for culture. She started a women's orchestra in the camp that played classical music during prisoner marches, and when new transports arrived, the horrifying contrast between classical music by composers like Beethoven or Mozart and the endless lines of skeletal prisoners in Nazi concentration camps reveals the deep moral corruption of the system. This contrast shows how completely the camp guards and doctors had separated human empathy from their actions. They lived in a world where beauty and culture existed beside cruelty and death, and they felt no conflict. Two women, Gräser and Mandel, were active participants in this system of terror. At Auschwitz, they worked alongside SS doctors like Josef Mengele, personally selecting prisoners, often twins, people with physical deformities, or simply those they disliked, for deadly medical experiments. These selections were almost always death sentences. Few survived the cruel, inhuman procedures that followed. Their involvement showed how deeply they had accepted the Nazi belief that some human lives were worthless, useful only as material for experiments. In January 1945, when Auschwitz was evacuated, Grazer and Mandel went separate ways. Grazer was moved to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued her brutal behavior until British forces liberated the camp in April. Mandel tried to escape justice by hiding in Bavaria, but was caught by American soldiers and later sent to Poland. Both women were put on trial for crimes against humanity. Grazer was executed by hanging on December 13th, 1945, becoming the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. Mandel was hanged on January 24th, 1948, in Montelupich prison in Krakow. Their stories reveal how the Nazi concentration camp system allowed ordinary people to commit extreme cruelty. These camps were places where sadism could grow freely, and people who might not have been violent under normal conditions became capable of great evil through gradual desensitization. Grazer and Mandel also break the common stereotype that women played a softer role in Nazi crimes. Their actions prove that the ability to commit atrocities does not depend on gender. It arises when extremist ideology, personal psychology, and institutional power all come together. The Nazi camps were more than just prisons. They were laboratories of pain. Torture became a policy, a system, a method. Female guards did not soften the cruelty. In many cases, they made it worse. They often went beyond their orders, creating their own ways of inflicting suffering. These women developed a variety of brutal techniques that mixed direct violence with deep psychological torment. They actively participated in mass killings, turning torture into a daily routine. There was a clear structure to the methods they used. This wasn't random cruelty. It followed patterns, taught and repeated across different camps. It was almost like a shared manual of terror. The first level was direct physical violence. Guards used whips as their signature weapon. These whips weren't standard. They were carefully made from special materials to maximize pain. Guards became skilled in striking the most sensitive areas of the body, faces, breasts, and genitals, with deadly precision. What started as so-called discipline quickly turned into acts of sadism. Many prisoners, already weak from starvation, died from the beatings alone. Physical punishment was also used to break spirits. Prisoners were forced to kneel for hours on sharp surfaces, stand still in painful positions, or do exhausting physical exercises until they fainted. In winter, they were made to stand outside in freezing temperatures, soaked in cold water. These punishments were often collective. If one person broke a rule, an entire group suffered. This built mistrust among prisoners and destroyed any chance of unity. Another tool of control was access to basic human needs. Guards controlled food, water, and bathroom access. They would deny prisoners the use of toilets, forcing them to soil themselves, then punish them for being dirty. Food was often stolen or withheld. In winter, blankets and warm clothes were taken away as punishment. This use of bodily needs as a weapon was a powerful way to break mental strength. One of the most cruel and destructive aspects of the system was psychological torture. This was not about physical pain. It was about crushing a person's sense of self. The guards worked to erase identity, dignity, and hope. Every part of camp life was designed to make prisoners feel powerless and less than human. These camps operated as complete systems of dehumanization. Every part, physical violence, hunger, fear, shame, was part of one large machine designed to destroy the human soul before the human body. And in many cases, the women who helped run this machine were not only willing participants, they were proud of what they did. Graza and Mandel are examples of how the Nazi system turned ordinary people into monsters. They weren't born evil, but in the brutal world of the camps, with power, ideology, and hatred on their side, they became capable of unthinkable crimes. The female guards in Nazi camps used humiliation as a powerful weapon. They forced prisoners to undress in front of others for inspections, mocking them with cruel and degrading comments. Women had their heads shaved, were given torn, thin uniforms, and were targeted based on personal, cultural, or religious vulnerabilities. Orthodox Jewish women, for example, were forced to break their religious rules. Women who were once respected in their communities were given the most shameful tasks. These acts weren't random. They were meant to destroy all sense of identity and dignity. By doing so, the guards tried to break the victims from the inside. One of the most twisted forms of psychological torture involved attacking emotional bonds. Mothers were separated from their children, sisters pulled apart, friends split up. The guards gave false or half-truths about their loved ones' fates. Sometimes, they forced prisoners to watch their family members being tortured, helpless, unable to act. In other cases, they made close individuals compete for food or medicine through unfair systems of privileges. This turned love and connection into more suffering. Animals were also used as weapons. Johanna Bormann, one of the guards, trained her dog to attack prisoners. These attacks caused serious wounds, and with no medical care, infections often led to slow, painful deaths. The psychological fear of being mauled by a dog added even more terror to an already unbearable life. Another method was forced labor, endless, exhausting, and often without purpose. Prisoners, already weak from hunger and sickness, were pushed to their physical limits. If they fell behind, they were beaten. Some were forced to dig ditches only to fill them back in, or move stones back and forth for no reason. These meaningless tasks weren't just cruel, they were designed to destroy the spirit. The female guards also took part in selections for the gas chambers. They decided who would die immediately and who would live temporarily. This cold and quick process reduced human lives to numbers or work potential. Even those chosen to live were deeply scarred, having watched family and friends sent to die. Medical experiments were another horror. The guards selected victims for these deadly procedures: twins, pregnant women, those with physical differences, or simply those who annoyed them. They were sent to medical blocks where doctors like Joseph Mengele performed forced sterilizations, injected toxins, infected them with diseases, or carried out surgeries with no anesthesia. The guards made sure no one escaped. They didn't just obey orders, they helped make sure the torture continued. One especially cruel tactic was unpredictability. Rules constantly changed. What was allowed one day could mean death the next. This kept prisoners in a constant state of fear. Some guards would act kind one moment and then explode in violence the next. This emotional whiplash caused deep psychological trauma. Prisoners couldn't find safety, not even in patterns. Every day was a trap. What's shocking is that this wasn't just the work of a few monsters. These methods were part of a system, a design process to erase humanity. The goal was to turn prisoners into broken, silent beings who would accept their own death. The guards didn't just follow orders. Many took initiative. They competed to see Who could be the most brutal, inventing new ways to hurt people, trying to outdo each other in cruelty? The liberation of Bergen-Belsen camp by British forces on April 15, 1945, exposed this system to the world. Unlike other camps where staff fled, Bergen-Belsen was captured with many guards still present, including numerous women. This led to a historic trial that helped lay the foundation for modern international law. For the first time, the world saw female perpetrators held accountable for crimes against humanity. These trials showed that evil had no gender. Women, just like men, could become instruments of torture, terror, and murder when placed in a system that rewarded cruelty and stripped away moral responsibility. When British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945, they encountered apocalyptic horror. Over 10,000 unburied corpses lay across the grounds. Inside the barracks, skeletal survivors clung to life, many dying from starvation and disease. These scenes left no doubt. Those responsible had to face justice. The British acted immediately, arresting all SS personnel present. Among them was the camp commandant, Joseph Kramer, infamously known as the Beast of Belsen, and several female guards, including Irma Grieser, Elizabeth Volkenrath, Johanna Bormann, and Hertha Ehlert. As a first step, the British forced the captured guards to help clean the camp. They carried rotting bodies into mass graves. The haunting photographs of female guards lifting corpses became iconic proof of their direct involvement in the suffering they had caused. These images marked the beginning of accountability. The Bergen-Belsen trial, officially titled The Trial of Joseph Kramer and Others, began on September 17, 1945, in Lüneburg under British military jurisdiction. It was one of the first formal attempts to prosecute crimes from the Holocaust. Beyond assigning guilt to individuals, the trial aimed to create a permanent, documented record of Nazi atrocities, a foundation that would support later proceedings like the Nuremberg trials. Out of 45 total defendants, 16 were women, mostly SS guards who had served at Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, and other camps. The tribunal faced a unique legal challenge, prosecuting German citizens for crimes against other Germans or nationals of occupied countries, often in locations outside British legal control. The solution was to charge them with war crimes and crimes against humanity. Emerging legal definitions developed specifically in response to Nazi brutality. Building the case required a massive investigative effort. British officers located and interviewed hundreds of survivors across Europe, many still hospitalized or displaced. Their testimonies gave clear, personal accounts of what each accused guard had done, leaving no space for vague denials or general excuses. Evidence presented in court included survivor statements, SS documents recovered from the camps, punishment records, signed orders, and shocking photographs of conditions after liberation. This overwhelming body of proof destroyed the common defense that the accused were just following orders. In fact, the court found many had acted on their own initiative, often going beyond official directives in cruelty. Some defendants admitted to minor offenses but denied the worst charges. Others claimed they didn't fully understand the true purpose of the camps. A few tried to downplay their knowledge of the connection between the harsh conditions they enforced and the mass death that followed. The court rejected these strategies when solid evidence showed their direct participation. On November 17, 1945, after 2 months of testimonies and deliberations, the court announced its verdicts. 11 defendants were sentenced to death, including Joseph Kramer, Irma Grieser, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Johanna Bormann, 14 others received prison terms ranging from life sentences to shorter durations. Another 14 were acquitted due to insufficient evidence to establish individual responsibility. The sentences reflected the severity of each defendant's crimes and how clearly their personal actions could be proven. A key factor in the death sentences was prior service at Auschwitz. Those who had worked at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen were often punished more severely than those who had only served at Belsen. The court saw participation in industrialized extermination as a uniquely grave offense. This decision, however, stirred debate. Some survivors argued that the level of cruelty should have mattered more than the location. They believed each guard's personal behavior, regardless of which camp it occurred in, should have been the main basis for sentencing. On December 13, 1945, the executions were carried out at Hamelin Prison. Irma Gresser, Elizabeth Volkenrath, and Johanna Bormann were hanged on the same day. Irma Gresser became the youngest woman ever executed under British law in the 20th century. The executions were conducted by Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's official executioner, who later documented the events in official records. The female guards who received prison sentences after the war faced very different outcomes. Hertha Ehlert, originally sentenced to 10 years, was released early in December 1951. She was part of a broader trend. Many war criminals had their sentences reduced or were released as part of changing political priorities during the early Cold War. As West Germany became a strategic ally against the Soviet bloc, pressure grew to normalize relations, leading to the early release of several convicted individuals. Others, like Hilda McKiss and Gertrude Feist, shared the same fate. But these few prosecutions were the exception. Of the estimated 3,500 women who served as guards in the Nazi concentration camp system, only a small number were ever brought to trial. The vast majority escaped justice. Many disappeared among the millions of displaced people in post-war Europe, often using false identities or simply returning to quiet lives in towns where their pasts were unknown or ignored. The capture of Bergen-Belsen, with its staff still present, was a rare case. Most other camps had been evacuated early, giving the guards time to flee and vanish. The uneven trail of justice after the Holocaust is seen in the stories of those who evaded capture. One example is Hermine Braunsteiner, a brutal guard from the Majdanek camp. She immigrated to the United States, living quietly as a housewife in Queens, New York. She was eventually identified in 1964. After years of legal struggle, she was extradited to Germany, tried, and sentenced to life in prison in 1981, nearly 40 years after her crimes. Despite these limitations, the Bergen-Belsen trials left a powerful legal legacy. They helped shape the development of international law. For the first time, courts prosecuted crimes against humanity under military jurisdiction, setting the stage for the Nuremberg trials and beyond. But just as importantly, they created a detailed legal and historical record through testimonies, documents, and physical evidence that confirm the systematic nature of Nazi crimes. One of the most lasting contributions of these trials was the rejection of the defense that individuals were just following orders. This principle, later formalized in the Nuremberg Code, began to take shape during the Bergen-Belsen proceedings. Female guards were held personally responsible, not only for obeying Nazi policies, but for actively taking part, often with personal initiative, in a clearly criminal system. Their participation was not passive. It was deliberate and often enthusiastic. Voices from the abyss, the survivors' testimonies. The survivor testimonies were the foundation of the trials. Without them, justice would not have been possible. These first-hand accounts offer detailed, consistent, and verifiable descriptions of atrocities. Beyond their legal impact, they became essential historical records, giving voice to the victims and exposing the depths of Nazi cruelty. Collecting these testimonies was a massive challenge in post-war Europe. Investigators from Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union traveled across the continent to locate survivors, many of whom were seriously ill or still recovering in makeshift hospitals. Gathering reliable statements required patience and precision, cross-checking identities with photos, verifying events through other witnesses, and carefully documenting every detail. The courts knew that defense lawyers would try to discredit these testimonies, claiming confusion or exaggeration. So investigators took extra care to ensure their accuracy. Testimonies gained credibility when people from different countries and backgrounds who had never met described the same patterns of behavior, the same brutal guards, and the same acts of violence. Especially powerful were statements that gave specific dates, names, or camp locations. Small personal details that only someone present could know helped prove direct contact with the accused. One striking example was the testimony of Elizabeth Katzenstein, a survivor of both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Her statement directly implicated Irma Grisha. She described specific punishments and methods of torture that Grisha personally carried out, matching details from other witnesses and confirmed by physical evidence and camp records. These voices from the abyss did more than bring criminals to justice. They preserved the truth. They recorded the pain, the horror, and the resistance of those who endured what should have been unthinkable. And through them, history remembers not only the crimes, but also the strength of those who survived to speak. Elizabeth Katzenstein recounted a chilling incident in which Irma Grisha brutally beat a pregnant Hungarian prisoner. The assault caused a miscarriage, and Grisha then denied the woman medical care, leading to her death from septicemia. The accuracy of Katzenstein's testimony, supported by independent accounts, made it especially significant as legal evidence. Luba Trecinska, a Polish nurse who worked in the Bergen-Belsen infirmary, testified against Elizabeth Volkenrath. She described how Volkenrath systematically confiscated medications meant for the sick, banned extra food rations for malnourished patients, and personally conducted infirmary selections, removing the weakest and sending them to overcrowded barracks where they died without care. As a trained healthcare worker, Trecinska established a clear link between Volkenrath's actions and preventable deaths. Equally valuable were the testimonies of prisoners who had held administrative roles in the camps, clerks, translators, and medical assistants who had insight into internal operations. Rachela Kalishek, a former translator at Bergen-Belsen, testified about conversations between Volkenrath and camp commander Josef Kramer. She described how they deliberately discussed reducing rations to speed up death rates in overcrowded areas. These statements directly contradicted Volkenrath's courtroom claims that she was unaware of the link between starvation and mass death. The testimonies were not limited to Jewish survivors. Witnesses like Katharina Neger, an Austrian political prisoner labeled a social by the Nazis, provided broader perspectives on the guards' brutality. Neger described how Hertha Botha deliberately selected non-Jewish prisoners for collective punishment, undermining the defense narrative that the guards were simply enforcing anti-Semitic policies from above. Her account revealed a pattern of cruelty not limited by ideology, but extending to all vulnerable inmates. Though fewer in number, testimonies from former SS personnel were equally damning. Facing likely conviction, some male guards provided evidence against their female colleagues. Otto Stoppel, an SS man stationed at Bergen-Belsen, testified to the personal initiative shown by both Volkenrath and Gresse in devising particularly harsh punishments. His account directly undercut the argument that they had merely followed orders. As insider testimony, it was difficult for the defense to dismiss. Presenting this kind of testimony required great care. Many survivors experienced severe psychological distress when recounting their experiences or confronting their abusers in court. Prosecutors often allowed for written statements when live testimony was too traumatic and worked closely with witnesses to prepare them. In some cases, proceedings had to be paused when survivors suffered emotional breakdowns while testifying, powerful evidence in itself of the crime's lasting psychological impact. Testimonies were reinforced by a large body of physical and documentary evidence. Personnel records revealed the full service history of the guards, often disproving claims that they had only served briefly or were unaware of the camp system's purpose. Signed orders, punishment logs, and prisoner lists helped confirm the accused's involvement in specific acts. Medical records revealed falsified causes of death, designed to cover up murders and medical neglect. Photographs also played a powerful evidentiary role. Images taken by British liberators during the camp's capture gave judges and jurors undeniable visual proof of the conditions described in court. Identification photographs helped survivors confirm the identity of their tormentors. Photos recovered from guards' personal belongings, showing them smiling or socializing inside camps, highlighted the shocking contrast between their apparent normalcy and the surrounding horror. Medical expert testimony further strengthened the prosecution's case. British military doctors who treated survivors immediately after liberation described injuries consistent with the physical abuse outlined in testimonies. Dr. Charles Mott identified specific scar patterns and trauma types that aligned with descriptions of instruments used by Irma Grese and others. These findings directly link survivors' wounds to the actions of named guards. These layers of testimony, eyewitness accounts, documents, medical evidence, and photographs transformed abstract statistics into verifiable personal narratives. They traced clear chains of responsibility from individual decisions to specific deaths. For example, when Sigismund Salomchik detailed Irma Grese's disciplinary practices, he revealed how authority flowed through the camp hierarchy and how personal initiative magnified cruelty. A recurring theme across testimonies was the gender-specific nature of abuse. Female prisoners were subjected to particular forms of torment, including sexualized humiliation, reproductive violence, and gender-targeted punishments. The female guards did not merely mirror male cruelty. They introduced their own forms of brutality, shaped by access to intimate areas of prisoners' lives, including their bodies and medical vulnerabilities. These testimonies, given under enormous emotional strain, established more than legal guilt. They created a permanent record of human suffering and of human accountability. The voices that rose from the abyss did more than describe pain. They named the people who inflicted it. Elizabeth Katzenstein provided harrowing testimony describing an act of extreme cruelty committed by Irma Grese. She recounted how Grese severely beat a pregnant Hungarian inmate, triggering a miscarriage. When the woman sought medical attention, Greece deliberately denied her access to treatment, leading to her death from septicemia. The precision of Katzenstein's statement, supported by multiple independent testimonies, elevated its evidentiary value, making it a central piece of judicial documentation. Luba Trzcinska, a Polish nurse assigned to the infirmary at Bergen-Belsen, offered critical insights into the conduct of Elizabeth Volkenrath. According to Trzcinska, Volkenrath confiscated medications designated for critically ill prisoners, obstructed efforts to provide additional nourishment to the malnourished, and orchestrated internal selections, removing the sickest from the infirmary and transferring them to overcrowded barracks where they perished without care. As a trained healthcare provider, Trzcinska drew a direct causal connection between Folkenrath's administrative decisions and the resulting fatalities, a contribution that gave her testimony significant legal and medical weight. Equally important were statements from former prisoners who had occupied clerical or support roles within the camp infrastructure, individuals who possessed intimate knowledge of operational dynamics. Rachela Kalishek, who worked as a translator in the Bergen-Belsen administrative offices, testified to overheard conversations between Folkenrath and camp commander Josef Kramer. She detailed how they discussed the intentional reduction of food rations as a method to hasten death rates in already overcrowded barracks. This testimony directly contradicted Folkenrath's claims of ignorance and illustrated deliberate intent to exacerbate mortality. Testimonies extended beyond Jewish survivors. Katharina Neger, an Austrian political detainee labeled asocial by the Nazi regime, presented evidence of punitive actions by Hertha Botha. She recounted how Botha singled out non-Jewish inmates for arbitrary discipline and public punishment. This testimony refuted defense claims that the guards merely executed top-down, anti-Semitic directives. Instead, it revealed a broader pattern of cruelty that targeted any individual deemed expendable, regardless of ethnic or ideological identity. Though fewer in number, statements from former SS personnel were instrumental. Otto Stoppel, an SS guard stationed at Bergen-Belsen, provided particularly damning evidence against his female counterparts. He described how Grieser and Folkenrath independently devised and implemented punitive practices that went far beyond any official mandate. His testimony, coming from within the SS structure, undermined the defense narrative centered on obedience and lack of agency. Insider confessions of this kind proved particularly resilient under cross-examination. Handling survivor testimonies required procedural sensitivity. Many witnesses were re-traumatized when recounting their suffering or facing their former captors in open court. In such cases, written depositions were accepted in lieu of live testimony, and witness preparation became essential to minimize psychological harm. Court sessions were occasionally suspended when witnesses broke down mid-testimony, each episode serving as a visceral reminder of the enduring trauma left by these crimes. Testimonies were bolstered by a formidable corpus of supporting evidence. Personnel rosters tracked the professional trajectories of female guards across various concentration camps, dismantling claims of short service or ignorance. Administrative documents, such as punishment orders and prisoner lists, authenticated the participation of the accused in systematic abuse. Medical death certificates frequently cited fabricated causes of death, often disguising fatalities resulting from starvation, infection, or physical violence. Photographic evidence provided a stark visual dimension. Images captured by British liberators documented the appalling conditions at liberation and were presented in court to substantiate survivor accounts. Identification photographs enabled victims to confirm the identities of their abusers. Other photographs, found among the personal possessions of guards, showed them relaxed or smiling within the campgrounds, revealing the disturbing normalcy with which they inhabited a setting of mass death. The prosecution also called upon medical experts. British military doctors who had treated survivors immediately following liberation testified regarding patterns of injury that aligned with eyewitness descriptions. Dr. Charles Mott, in particular, matched visible scars and trauma patterns to known methods of abuse used by specific guards, such as Irma Grise. These findings provided tangible physical links between testimony and individual culpability. Altogether, this constellation of evidence eyewitness accounts, documents, images, and expert analysis transformed the trials from abstract legal exercises into detailed reconstructions of systematic atrocity. When survivors like Sigismund Salomchik described the enforcement strategies employed by Irma Grisa, they helped map the internal mechanisms of control, punishment, and hierarchy within the concentration camp system. These descriptions highlighted how individual initiative magnified the institutional cruelty already embedded in camp policy. A gendered dimension ran through many accounts. Female prisoners were often subjected to uniquely brutal forms of mistreatment, ranging from invasive body searches and forced nudity to reproductive violence and psychological degradation. The testimony revealed that female guards did not simply replicate male violence, but developed distinct methods of inflicting harm, shaped by their access to the most intimate and vulnerable aspects of prisoners' lives. In the end, the survivors' voices accomplished more than the establishment of legal guilt. They forged a permanent archive of accountability. Their words gave form to suffering, named perpetrators, and resisted the erasure of crimes that might otherwise have been lost in silence. These testimonies became enduring acts of witness, legal instruments, historical documents, and moral declarations carved out of trauma. A comparative analysis of trial testimonies, administrative documentation, and intercamp transfer records enables the reconstruction of precise chains of command and individual responsibility within the women's sectors of the Nazi concentration camp system. SS personnel archives detail the hierarchical structure in which senior female guards, such as Maria Mandel, held defined administrative positions, exercising authority over subordinate staff and specific sections of the camps. These records help contextualize individual actions within the broader framework of institutional governance and command. Of particular relevance is documentation tracing the chronological development of the female guard apparatus. Personnel files reveal a marked increase in female recruitment beginning in 1943, a shift that coincided with the expansion of the camp system and the redeployment of male SS personnel to the front lines. These statistical patterns underscore the structural role of female guards in sustaining the operational capacity of the camps during the final phases of the war. Such data facilitate a broader understanding of women's participation not as isolated anomalies, but as integral components of the Nazi machinery of repression and extermination. Recent historiographical approaches have contrasted administrative documents with trial testimonies to assess the degree of operational discretion exercised by female guards. This methodological framework reveals that, while general directives were issued by camp commandants, many female guards implemented these orders with significant latitude, applying personal interpretations that often intensified the severity of disciplinary practices. This evidence refutes the post-war defense strategy of mechanical obedience and instead supports a narrative of individualized initiative operating within institutional guidelines. Documentary records relating to the role of female guards in selection procedures are of particular historical and legal significance. Files from Auschwitz, when cross-referenced with survivor testimonies and medical records, confirm that senior figures such as Mandel and Elisabeth Volkenrath participated directly in selections for the gas chambers. These procedures, euphemistically labeled as special treatment in SS bureaucratic language, clearly assign direct agency and culpability to the women involved in executing extermination policies. Post-war judicial archives constitute a foundational corpus for understanding the actions of female guards. The records from trials held at Bergen-Belsen, Ravensbrück, and other venues include detailed interrogations, cross-examinations, evidentiary submissions, verdicts, and appeals. As primary sources, these materials offer a procedurally verified account of events and decisions, forming the basis for rigorous historical inquiry grounded in documented legal scrutiny. Complementary to textual documentation is the body of photographic evidence recovered from a variety of sources. Official SS identification photographs, images found among the personal effects of guards, and liberation photography taken by Allied forces together offer a visual dimension to the archive. Particularly notable are photographs taken during the cleanup operations at Bergen-Belsen, in which female guards were compelled to confront and manage the aftermath of the atrocities they had helped facilitate, capturing the stark juxtaposition between perpetration and consequence. The judicial treatment of female guards reflects an evolving legal conceptualization of crimes on a mass scale. Records from early post-war trials, 1945 to 1947, illustrate the nascent application of emerging legal categories such as crimes against humanity. Later trials, from the 1950s through the 1980s, demonstrate the gradual refinement of legal frameworks, incorporating developments in international jurisprudence and adjusting to the shifting political and social context of the Cold War era. This legal trajectory reveals how judicial systems grappled with crimes that challenge conventional doctrines of accountability and justice. However, trial records also expose significant disparities in the administration of justice. While prominent figures like Grice and Mandel were executed after summary proceedings, statistical analyses show that the majority of female guards were never brought to trial. Of those convicted, many received relatively lenient sentences or benefited from early release programs and post-war amnesties. Documentation from later extradition proceedings, such as the protracted case of Hermine Braunsteiner-Ryan, 1973 to 1981, illustrates both the enduring pursuit of accountability and the practical limitations of transnational legal enforcement. The corpus of survivor testimonies, preserved in judicial and historical archives, represents an invaluable legacy. Many statements were supplemented with personal diaries, letters, sketches, and other contemporaneous materials that provide a deeply personal, internal view of camp life. Collections such as the Fortunoff Video Archive, the USC Shoah Foundation, and Yad Vashem continue to house these narratives, ensuring their accessibility for historical, legal, and educational purposes. These testimonial records not only document suffering, but also serve as instruments of historical truth and legal reckoning. Historiographically, the study of female concentration camp guards has undergone notable evolution. Early scholarly efforts largely concentrated on high-profile individuals such as Grice or Mandel. However, more recent research has shifted toward comprehensive analyses that treat female guards as a distinct functional group within the broader apparatus of the Nazi concentration camp system. Contemporary scholarship, such as that by Wendy Lower and Claudia Koons, has situated the role of female guards within a wider matrix of women's participation across multiple layers of the National Socialist regime. These works have illuminated both structural continuities and unique gender dynamics that characterized female involvement in the machinery of persecution and genocide. Inquiries into the post-war lives of these women raise critical questions about societal and institutional continuity after 1945. Sources such as denazification records, employment reintegration files, and specific case studies, such as that of Hertha, who lived until 2000 and at times spoke publicly about her past, reveal the complexities of post-war transition. These documents show that even as Germany moved towards democratic reconstruction, many former female guards navigated reintegration with remarkable ease. suggesting the persistence of institutional leniencies and societal ambivalence towards female perpetrators. The preservation and accessibility of documentation pertaining to female concentration camp personnel have become vital components of the Holocaust memorial and educational infrastructure. Institutions such as the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, and the Memorial de l'Internement de Compiègne have played a critical role in maintaining these archives. Moreover, the digitization of previously fragmented and dispersed documents has facilitated global scholarly access, supporting both historical research and public education on female participation in Nazi crimes. This corpus of documentation has also made substantial methodological contributions to the study of perpetrators. The complexity involved in reconstructing individual motivations and operational roles has led to the development of interdisciplinary methodologies. These combine administrative records, survivor testimonies, judicial proceedings, and socio-political context to form a more nuanced understanding of how institutionalized violence was implemented and maintained. Through this multi-layered lens, the internal functioning of concentration camps and the specific actions of their female personnel can be more fully apprehended. Crucially, this body of documentation also functions as a bulwark against Holocaust denial and revisionism. The convergence of survivor testimony, authenticated bureaucratic records, and legally scrutinized judicial documentation forms a robust evidentiary base. This factual framework stands in direct opposition to attempts at historical distortion and safeguards the integrity of collective memory. By anchoring the atrocities of the Nazi era in verifiable sources, these archives ensure that the crimes and the complicity of all actors, male and female, remain documented for future generations.